Um, Hey, my name is Bartosz Blimke, and today I'm going to talk to you about WebMock, Ruby gem for mocking HTTP requests. First, a bit about me. I've been building software for over 20 years. Back in 2006, when I was still a happy Java programmer, a friend of mine, Andrzej Krzywda, maybe you know him, came to me and said, "Hey, have you heard of that language getting popular, Ruby?" And then he sent me a link to this book. I don't know if you know it, Wise Guide to Ruby. And I've been using Ruby ever since. I live in Warsaw, but I work remotely since before that was popular. And yeah, I'm the author and a single maintainer of WebMock. This is the second presentation I prepared about WebMock. The first one was back in 2009 in London, and I was very stressed at that time, I remember. And I created an extrapolation of my presentations, and I predict that my next presentation will be prepared in 2039. Therefore, this year you have a unique chance to learn something about WebMock. Okay, so what does WebMock offer? Well, first, it allows us to stop HTTP requests. So what does it mean? It means it allows you to declare fake responses so that when your Ruby application attempts to make an HTTP request, instead of making a real connection and making a real request, a fake response is being returned. And second, it allows verifying that the request has been executed, whether that was a stubs request or a real request. The idea is not original. There was a gem called FakeWeb before, and it worked well, but its request matching capabilities were quite limited, and it only supported net HTTP. Therefore, I decided to create my own solution. And I created WebMock during a one-day company hackathon. And what's important, I created WebMock to address my own needs as a Ruby developer. And these needs happen to be the needs of many other Ruby developers. And hence, WebMock has been downloaded more than 250 million times. It has almost 4,000 stars on GitHub. More than 260 people contributed to WebMock over the last 15 years, including AI, right? So about 2 months ago, Sam Saffron, the co-founder of Discourse, submitted a pull request to WebMock, and he included a transcript of his conversation with ChatGPT discussing the necessary changes to WebMock to add the feature. And fortunately, ChatGPT was pretty useless, so we as Ruby developers are still safe. WebMock is being used by thousands of projects on public open source project on GitHub, and it's a dependency of thousands of gems on Ruby gems. These are some of the frameworks and gems that are popular and depend on WebMock. You might have used some of them. And if you haven't had a chance to use any of them, then you probably used this one. WebMock became an inspiration for programmers in other languages who created similar tools as WebMock. Okay, so what does WebMock offer? Well, first it gives us this nice DSL for declaring request stubs. This DSL is specific to HTTP. So it allows us to create tests which are easy to read. And then it gives us the DSL for asserting that, for verifying that the requests have been executed. Please note that both DSLs are HTTP client library agnostic. WebMock follows stop, execute, verify paradigm, which I borrowed from Mockito, Java testing framework. It's slightly different to, for example, what you get with RSpec, where a single expect declaration creates a stop and expectation at the same time. With WebMock, these two steps are separated. But thanks to that, we get flexibility. So we can stop without verifying, or we can verify without stopping. WebMock offers request callbacks. So you can execute some code after an HTTP request has been executed. And this, for example, allows us to record requests. There is a popular gem called VCR, which allows you to record requests and then replay them, and it uses WebMock underneath. WebMock has many other features for stubbing. It allows you to stub requests to timeout, or it offers stubbing requests with basic authentication. You can also record requests, raw request responses with curl, and then replay them with WebMock. WebMock supports all popular Ruby HTTP clients, and it supports all popular testing frameworks in Ruby. Okay, but so we might ask, why mocking HTTP requests at all in the first place? Well, first allows us to run our tests without having an internet connection. So if you're on a Polish train, or if you're on a plane, you can run your tests and you can do your work without having internet connection. It protects you from making accidental changes to external API. So let's say you configured production credentials for your test environments and you run your tests. WebMock will stop any external requests going through. It gives you consistent and reliable test results. So it doesn't matter if an external API is currently down or whether it returns 500 responses. Your tests are isolated and they will pass. And it also gives you faster tests because you do not have to wait you're not affected by any network delays or by slowed down third-party API responses. You can easily test various edge cases like timeouts, 500 or 400 responses. And all the setup for WebMock is in Ruby. So all the stubs are declared where your tests are. But you can also use WebMock. You can also use mocking in your development environment. So you can create some request stubs, declare them in development environment, and then develop without having an internet connection again. When testing your app manually, you can easily, again, test various scenarios. So you can check, how does my UI behave when I get 500 response or timeout from an external API? Another feature that I very much like is that it allows you to develop your code without having access to an external API. So I once worked on a project that heavily relied on a third-party API. And despite that, we haven't received access to that API for about 1.5 months. And it didn't stop us from developing. We just read the specification of that external API. We wrote some stubs. We declared them in development environment, and we're ready to go. We've been developing. And you can do the same in staging environment to demo the features that you have developed. So this is how a sample request, sample declaration of stubs in development or staging environment can look like. Okay, so we know that WebMock, that mocking HTTP requests is useful at times, but then why do it with WebMock? Why use WebMock instead of creating your own solution? Well, it first gives you the nice DSL. So let's say we found a piece of code like that in our application and we are supposed to change it. So we want to do things right, so we do test first. So first we find a test that covers that code. We go to our test suite and we find a piece of code like that. So what do I do in a scenario like that? The first thing I would do is to git blame and check who wrote that terrible code. Just realize it was me 5 years ago. Happens. And then we import WebMock and use WebMock DSL for that. So now that we have a nice test setup that is easy to read, we can change our code. And first we can change it to use some more friendly HTTP library, like HTTP-RB, for example, which gives us this nice DSL for making requests. WebMock is very useful for test-driven development. It allows you to write your tests, to write your tests to verify the behavior instead of verifying the implementation. So you can verify that your app is going to make an HTTP request without thinking what HTTP client you're going to use or what methods you're going to call on that HTTP client. But WebMock is also very useful for legacy applications. So when I receive a legacy Ruby application, one of the first things I would do is import WebMock and enable it in development and test environments. And now I'm safe. I know that if I execute the test or if I execute the development, the app in development, it's not going to surprise me with some third-party API calls. And if it makes an API calls, WebMock will stop it and will notify me about this. WebMock supports unescaped versions of the URLs, which makes the tests way more readable. It's way easier to change a URL in a form which looks like that. And the feature that I very much like in WebMock is, in case you declare a stub, HTTP request stub, and then you execute the request, and that request for some reason doesn't match the stub, WebMock will stop the request and will print these nice instructions on how this request can be stopped. So you can just copy and paste it into your test. It will also print all the registered stubs underneath. So WebMock exists to make testing HTTP simpler. But with that simplicity, with that DSL, comes the cost of not knowing what actually happens underneath. So we somehow lose the control over what code is being executed and what happens. And this might feel a bit like magic. And if you are like me, you do like to understand how things work. And I went to this talk by Xavier a few months ago, and it got me very inspired. So Xavier explained how Zeitwerk works underneath. And I thought, I'll do the same for WebMock. I'll explain how WebMock works underneath. But to understand how, we first have to understand how HTTP client live. So to do that, let's take a look how a sample HTTP client in Ruby might look like. Well, first it will have this public API. The public API will usually represent HTTP verbs, HTTP methods. And we can use this sample HTTP client like that. But these public methods usually do not do much. They usually call some private method or collection of methods that do all the heavy lifting underneath. So let's call this method which does all the heavy lifting handle request and see what it does. Well, usually it will first build the request. So it will take the URL param, the past headers, normalize them, parse the header, add any default headers, and at the end it will create a request object containing all that necessary information to make the request. If the HTTP client supports request middleware, and the middleware will be executed. Then when we have all the request data gathered, it will send this data over TCP or SSL connection. And when the response is returned over that connection, a response object will be built. And then again, if HTTP client library supports response middleware, and the middleware will be executed. Okay, so now that we know how a typical HTTP client in Ruby works, we can understand how WebMock works. So first, stubbing. When you declare a stub using stub request declaration, what WebMock will do underneath is it will create a request stub object. And stub inside a global request stub registry. And request stub object consists of two main attributes. One is a request pattern, which is used to match the executed requests. And the second is a collection of responses that are of fake responses that are to be returned when that request is being executed. And what's important here is that request stub, that the stub request method returns the request stub, which allows us to chain the calls further. So we can chain it with the with method. The with method extends the request pattern, so it extends the criteria upon which the request is matched. So from now on, our request stub will only match the requests that have a body of foo and headers of application JSON. And then again, a request stub is being returned, and we can chain it to a toReturn method. And toReturn method adds a fake response to that request stub. So now we have request registry with a request stub with a declared fake response. A request WebMock also allows us to declare after request callbacks. And what happens underneath? There is a global callback registry where the past block is being registered. Okay, but so now we have this global request stop registry, and we have this global callback registry. But the requests are still not being intercepted. So what's responsible for intercepting the requests? That's what WebMock uses adapters for. And WebMock has a separate adapter for each HTTP library. So there will be a separate adapter for NetHTTP and separate adapter for curb. And to understand how adapters work, let's create an adapter for our sample HTTP client. So the first thing an adapter will do is it will find the class that contains the handle request method, this method which does all the heavy lifting. And then it will create a copy of that class by subclassing. And then it will start monkey patching that handle request method. So after the request is built, it will create a request signature. Request signature contains all the information required to match a request. And then it will try to find a request stub matching that request signature. If it's found, it will return a fake response. If not, it will make a real request. But WebMock, by default, does not allow any real connections, real requests to be made. So first, it has to verify that a real request can really be made if the request URI is permitted to make a real request. If not, WebMock will raise an error, and you will get this nice instructions being printed on how to stop the request. WebMock will then execute any request callbacks that have been registered in our callback registry and run any response middleware. So to reiterate, first a request is built, then request signature is created and registered inside request registry. If there is a request stub matching that request, a fake response will be returned. Otherwise, we're going to check whether the URL is permitted for making a real request, and if not, to raise an error and print the nice instructions on how to stop the request. Then any callbacks registered will be executed. We're going to run the response middleware and return the response. So now we have our adapter, we have our copy of a class, but still no request, but still if we make a request, still the original class, the original code is being executed. So what we have to do is, what WebMock will do is it will first take the reference to the original class. And then it will replace the class associated with the client constant and assign our copy of a class to that client constant. So from now on, when we call sample HTTP client, our copy of a class will be called. And while monkey patching is not very nice, and replacing classes, again, may sound a bit dirty, I found this solution quite neat, because we are not overriding, we are not monkey patching the original class, we are creating our own copy for modification. And then we can always go back. We can disable WebMock and again revert the changes and set the original class to be used. So now when we call WebMock enable, WebMock will enable all the adapters and will replace the original classes with the copied classes, with the copied extended classes. So then when stub request is being declared, this will create a stub and declare it in the stub registry. So now when we execute a request, WebMock adapter will intercept that request. This copied class will intercept the request, and a fake response will be returned. But now we can also do something else. We can verify that this request has been executed. And if you remember the request signatures that the adapter has been creating and registering, WebMock will now check whether there is a request signature matching our pattern. And this way, it will verify whether request has been executed or not. So yeah, this is, as you can see, there is not much magic, just brute monkey patching. And to finish, there is something very important that I would like to share with you. Something very important to me. So I told you that I created WebMock to address my own needs as a Ruby developer. But there was also another factor that heavily affected me building and releasing WebMock. And that factor was people. So back in 2009, I lived in London and I worked for a company called New Bamboo. And New Bamboo was a team of very passionate developers. We called ourselves Bambinos. And we were really proud of it. I was very proud to be part of this team. We shared our passion. We motivated each other. We encouraged each other. We supported each other. And during my over 20 years of building software, one thing that I have learned is that the most important factor for your growth is the people you work with and what you learn from them. So when Linus Torvalds said these words, I treated it like a compliment. He was somehow right, because there is something unique about our Ruby community. So to me, Ruby was always not only about the nice code, not only about Rails. It was mainly about the people. People who share their passion. People who are friendly. People who motivate each other. And people who are nice to each other. And I'm very happy that I'm here today and we can all celebrate our passion for Ruby here at Visuality Office. Thank you. Any questions?
Maybe not related to the code, but most your work like a single contributor to your own game.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us about your experience with contributors, others? Because I'm assuming that you had some guys who tried to open PR, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And how it was.
Very rewarding. I'm very grateful to everyone who contributed to WebMock. So, you know, being a single maintainer makes you tired sometimes. So you burn out sometimes. And sometimes there are months where, I don't look at WebMock at all. And there are new versions of Ruby which break WebMock. There are new versions of HTTP clients. But then you get all these contributors who surprisingly open a PR. Often there isn't even an issue raised. So there is a new version of the library of HTTP clients released, and I don't even get an issue opened because someone already submitted a PR with the fix. I very much like the ideas that people come with. Some ideas work well. Sometimes they need more analysis. There are currently about 25 open pull requests in WebMock because all of them are worth merging at some point, but not ready yet. So I just keep them open. Also, there are about 140 open issues. Some of them since 2009. But yeah, it's really rewarding, and people contribute to WebMock, and then I say, oh man, great, thanks. I had no time to look into it, so great that you submitted the PR. And in the response, I actually get, oh no, I'm grateful to you. Like, thanks for WebMock. And this is really motivating. This keeps me going. That's why it's despite 15 years, I still have motivation to maintain it. And so yeah.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks for
Yeah.
First of all, I want to say thank you for WebMock. I've been using it maybe 12 years at least. And usually
Thanks.
it's in addition to VCR.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did not know that. Thank you.
Yeah, early days VCR used WebMock, solely WebMock, and now they have adapters for some of the HTTP libraries.
I use WebMock PLRUG.
Oh, cool.
Thank you for presentation. My question will be about adapters. Any real life situation when you enable and disable adapter during the test?
Mm-hmm. So when do I enable?
Yeah, for example, you start a test, you prepared something, and during the test you disable adapter, enable it.
Oh,
because I did not know that I can disable adapter.
Yeah, you can. You can actually. Yeah.
Real life situation and test.
Oh, I actually never had a case like that, but there are people who have these cases. There is currently a discussion that someone started that well, one of the problems with WebMock that I regret from the beginning is that I created all these registers to be global. And so hopefully the next major version will change that. And someone started a discussion recently even about having thread local registries, because they have a case where they run multiple threads and each of them executes separate requests. And yeah. So one thing that I want to change, and one thing that's really important to me on the roadmap, is to make these registries local. So you can define where you want to start the registry to be active and when it finishes.
Because I saw sometimes that they're using parallel jam, and this sometimes strange errors happen.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. Maybe.
So yeah, if you find a case, please raise an issue.
No, it's parallel jam. It's using count, but yeah, then we create 8 reads. So it mixes responses or mixes.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay. Good to know.
Thank you.
Have you ever thought about doing like a workshop with WebMock?
You know,
Yeah.
It's difficult to answer this question because I thought WebMock is an obvious gem for any new project. You
Yeah.
think, like, you need to add this gem on the beginning of the project
Now
when you start doing supporting legacy. So
yeah, now I'm thinking about this. So yeah, I'll be happy to do it, actually. If there is a space for it, then yeah, sure.
We do have space, and I think there is enough community around us. Like we all use that, and now we know that you're here. And like, bigger people like dig into it a bit and maybe to see how. Because if you give something to like thousands of people, they will all find different use cases and the ones that you never think about. So it would be great to see how you intended it to be used. I know that it's written about free. Yeah, it would be great to see how you envision using this gem and some tweaks and smaller things. Please think about it.
Okay.
And I'll come back.
Great, thanks.
We would like to attend the workshop.
Oh, great. Thanks. To extend that, actually, it's the other way as well. So I have no idea of the ways people are using WebMock, and I would really like to know as well. Like,
Any other questions?
how much time do you spend to add new adapter?
on an adapter. Well, it depends. Sometimes some of the adapters were pretty easy to write, like a few hours, I guess. Well, even the initial adapters for NetHTTP and HTTP client have been written on this hackathon. Of course, there were extended bugs have been fixed after and so on. But maybe 2 days, the initial version. The nice thing about developing an adapter in WebMock is that I have this shared test suite that covers all the cases that WebMock covers. And so in order to implement an adapter, I just have to make sure that the test suite passes, and that's it. Yeah, some different ways of making a request. Like a complicated one will be curb, for example, or Typhus. They call, instead of calling TCP connections or SSL connections, they will call libcurl internals, the C bindings, and there are many different paths to get there. So there are many methods in C, in the C bindings that they're calling, and you have to cover all these scenarios. So this will be the more complicated adapters to implement. But again, HTTP adapters are not that frequent. The latest one actually, HTTPX, I have learned that it supports WebMock by Googling or by finding it on GitHub, because actually the developer of HTTPX, when he released HTTPX, he released it with WebMock adapter already built in. So and he didn't talk to me, he didn't notify me. So I just learned from the internet that, yeah, there is HTTPX and it supports WebMock.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.